The biggest haters of ReZero has to be the fans of ReZero, because after I watched this episode, I was left with emotions. I was glued to my seat. This 20-minute episode felt like 5 minutes, and I was so emotionally invested in this episode. I took online just to see what people were saying. I expected to see a lot of people tearing up, crying about the whole, just interaction between, Wilhelm and his wife, getting to see what it means to be a sword saint, getting to see what it means to be perfect technically and used as a weapon, as a tool for a country. There's a lot of themes that's thrown into this episode, and there's a lot of emotionally charged moments, and it's been built up for basically 9 years. Like, just for those that are out of the know, for instance, this whole stuff with, Theresia and Wilhelm has been literally set up since 2016, basically since, ReZero Season 1 came out, and it's been that long, 9 years for that, and we finally, after such a long time, we got closure to this build-up, these side characters that honestly I really have loved since I first laid eyes upon them when I started watching ReZero. And so when I took online to see what people were saying, all I saw was honestly mostly negativity about this episode, which makes me sad. It really makes me sad. And I'll talk about what they're saying in a second, but I'm just like, I wonder if it's because I'm just naive. Maybe I'm just too big of a mega fan of ReZero, and maybe I just, overlook flaws. And I know at the end of the day, ReZero isn't a perfect series. I know there's flaws with it. I know there's flaws within the seasons as well, with some cut content or pacing issues. But overall, it has still been a very fantastic Season 3. And it makes me incredibly sad to just see the fan base, upset, really upset. And honestly, I've been seeing this a lot with Season 3. I mean, it's honestly been happening since Season 2. I mean, ever since Season 2 came out years ago around COVID times, a lot of the fan base just was extremely toxic with Season 2. Always constantly negative about the whole thing every single week. And then now it seems like that overall interaction has basically continued with Season 3, and honestly feels like it's gotten a lot worse, despite obviously ReZero Season 3 being really good. The only issues I would ever give Season 3, if I really wanted to give it any issues, is just the lack of extended episodes, but even then, that's completely fine. But, backing up from that for a second, why are people hating on this episode? Well, from my understanding, people are a little bit upset with, for one, the art and animation, which is to be expected. I mean, you can't just give people a amazing episode like last week from Vincent, that whole minute segment with Garfield and all that, and then have people go back to the normal animation of ReZero. When you give people a taste of good art and animation, like a really good example of it, people really want to continue to feast on that type of art and animation, and they just don't want to go back. People's expectations have just been built up way too high. And so going from an episode like that into this episode, definitely I think already had some negativity going to be surrounding this, because this episode was never going to be to that same level. That's the cold, harsh truth. And episodes like what we got last week is a rarity amongst, let's say, the ReZero anime. And as I talked about in my episode review last week, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to get the very wrong impression about what ReZero is or what it's about because of clips from last week's episode, and it seems like the damage from that is already starting to happen with this episode that released. But obviously, like I said, most of the complaints I've seen isn't necessarily from newcomers, it's actually from the fan base itself. And one of the big reasons it always stems down to is art and animation, but also pacing, and certain little things cut here and there. And to be fair, it's been a long time since I read this content within the light novel / web novel. I'm going to be completely blunt. But it seems like the main points, everything that was really supposed to be there, was here for this episode, and it feels like anything that was cut was very minor in the grand scheme of things. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, please do. But overall, the main gist of the fight between Theresia and, for instance, Wilhelm was a love story. It was a tragic love story where two could not really confess their feelings in the end. For instance, Wilhelm didn't say verbally to his wife, "I love you," until the very end, which is just tragic. And then also how she lost her life thanks to the White Well, but as this episode, showcases, is actually from Pandora. More on that in a moment. And then also the relationship with, Heinkel and Reinhardt. There's a lot of complicated themes and family themes and stuff. And it's really sad just to see so many people, upset with the episode because maybe the pacing feels a little bit different, or the the art or the emotional weight feels flat. I don't know where people are seeing that. Once again, this comes back to maybe I'm naive or something, because as someone that recently went back and like rewatched ReZero Season 1 and getting to see like the scene with Wilhelm and all that, looking at the flower on the ground while fighting the White Whale, thinking about his wife, and then as you know, you see the flashback in this latest episode of him kissing her. She's like, hey, please say the words you love me. And then we, fast forward to the ending of the White Whale and all that, how it's brought down and he declares I love you on top of it. It's very emotionally charged. And as someone that's recently watched this, I'm just like, how do people not get emotional about this? Like, it's really sad, honestly. I mean, I know it's not like the main plot point of the story because it's not Subaru or anything, but it is a plot point that's been built up for 9 years. So I don't know, it's incredibly sad just to see the negativity around this. But with that being said, I guess I do want to talk about the themes and what really makes this episode, at least for me, very good. And that is Theresia as a character. Hopefully I'm saying her name right. If I'm saying it wrong, do correct me in the comments. I know you guys will. But anyways, she has a really tragic life. It is just straight up tragedy because we see her origin point. We get to see how she was as a kid and that she was a little girl that legitimately just wanted to be a princess slash gardener. She loved flowers. We literally see the opening sequence of her as a kid planting flowers, getting her hands dirty, and then suddenly amongst this she is gifted the divine protection of the Sword Saint. And it's a very sad scene because any goals, any aspirations, anything that she wanted to be or could have been was thrown out the window into the dust. Like, it became dust because of the divine protection that was passed on to her. It's very sad because it shows that once you obtain that divine protection, your life that you once had is over. Any connections and stuff you have become a lot more complicated. Society doesn't view you the same way anymore. They view you more as an instrument of war or a tool itself for the country. And even your family members might come to grow to dislike you, hate you because of the role or title that you now have, or maybe even fear you. Or it might even cost them their lives because of the title you obtained. Whatever it may be, it's a very sad thing to gain. And a lot of people probably looking from the outside, at least in the world of ReZero, might think that they want to become the Sword Saint. They wish they were strong as the Sword Saint. They wish they could rival the power of Reinhardt. But when they actually obtain that power, tragedy and truth sets in, and you realize the reality of the situation isn't so just. It isn't happiness, because we see just right at the start, she is able to defeat her brother that has been training in the sword for literally years. His entire life, he's been training in the sword to be able to obtain the title of the Sword Saint. And literally, as soon as she obtains the divine protection, she instantly is able to defeat him. And her response, she just starts breaking down and crying because she realizes just how much effort and how much time he's put into the sword. And to realize she just took it like that, didn't even ask for it, and like she was able to destroy him like nothing, when it's very clear she never really utilized the sword much at all. It's tragedy. And I mean, it's even laid out to us in this episode that she saw so many areas of weakness and flaws and openings within her own brother's fighting style that she could instantly have destroyed if she wanted to. And it shows once again what the divine protection does. It puts you on a higher level. You become basically a monster. You no longer can really be considered a normal human anymore just because of what the divine protection does. And so when you think about the situation, it's sad to see someone that dedicated so much time amount to basically nothing, or at the very least nothing in comparison to a divine protection that was just willfully given to her. Now, that's another thing to really segue into, which is the cost of the divine protection and what it necessarily does to people. I think in general, what we see from the divine protection, there's a lot of mixed things. We have seen it constantly outlined within the story of ReZero, and one thing that it's definitely shown is that the divine protection in general is used as a means of a tool or a weapon, and people no longer view you as a person anymore. Reinhardt is a very good example of this. But it's also, we've seen how it's affected family members. Wilhelm and Heinkel is a really good example of this, and obviously with her obtaining divine protection, you would assume that her brother would hate her, that her brother would not want anything to do with her, maybe want her to potentially just disappear, all these different dark thoughts, so to speak. But despite that, when she's being a coward hiding in the storage shed, he comes in there and he comforts her and says he will protect her, and it's a very emotional charged moment because it shows that there is no envy, there is no jealousy jealousy. He just wants to do right by his sister, and he is still confident in his own swordsmanship. He's confident in his blade. It's a very nice scene. I love the entire sequence here, and I really do just enjoy this. But obviously, all good things eventually come to an end, and obviously, on the battlefield, she loses her brother. She walks into the battlefield and sees her brother literally gone. Thanks to her own actions, her whole family is deceased, basically, because she decided to be a coward and not carry the title of Sword Saint. And the flower disappearing and burning away, I think, is a really good example of showcasing that her dreams and aspirations of what she once wanted is just dead right then and there. As much as she loves flowers and wants to plant them, it's not something she could ever really do anymore. All she can do is leave blood and destruction in her wake. And I think that it's very significant in this moment. It shows her psychological psychosis, honestly, where she thinks about the sword, become the sword, I am the sword saint, and all that. And as she lifts up the sword, you see literally flowers form underneath her entire area, showcasing her new dream, her new aspiration is to carry the sword. It's not what she wanted, but it's the role that she's been given and she has to carry with her. Which is what makes this entire scene with Wilhelm just so important, because Wilhelm was someone that grounded her in reality. She was able to actually try to feel like a person. She was someone that was able to live a life, have children, and she was able to just be normal for a while. As long as she could have, so to speak, with the gifts she was given. And because she, was able to do that, it was all thanks to Wilhelm, because of how much he loved her. And I think that it really just shows the connection of husband and wife here, and their love story, and how tragic it really is. And you can even see the connections of the flowers here, even in the foreground, showing that she never truly wanted to lose the love she had for flowers itself, and she harbors and holds on to this thanks to her husband. But obviously, eventually reality sets in, and the roles of their titles and stuff are taken, and they need to be able to fight, because obviously that is what the Sword Saint and the Sword Demon does. And obviously, we get to see the White Whale once again, which is, very interesting. I mean, it's been 9 years since we've seen this thing actually interact with new animation and art and all that, and here we go. It's back again, but we see the fight. But as we all know from what was clarified in Season 1, Theresia is supposed to lose. She dies to the White Whale, which has always been questionable for anyone that has ever thought about it, because obviously the White Whale can obliterate your existence completely, like erase you. But the fact that nobody forgot who she was or anything implies that the White Whale might not have really killed her. So this episode does give closure to that, and we see who the real culprit actually is, and that is Pandora herself. She appears. And she's very brief within this episode, but I think if there is one thing that this episode does, it showcases that no matter what happens, some of the most important events within the verse of ReZero is directly correlated, and she is somewhat responsible for. Because it's very fascinating that Pandora, of all times to make an appearance, she appears before Theresia soon as she loses her divine protection to Reinhardt. Suddenly, she instantly appears, and she is the one that puts her down. Fascinating. On top of that, what's also very fascinating is that Pandora clearly has some form of foresight to a degree, because we gotta think about what she did to Regulus. This is something that I think a lot of people didn't really notice in the previous episode when we saw, like, Regulus get defeated. But Pandora puts Regulus in the ground. I feel like a lot of people forget about that, but Regulus was literally in the ground with his head only sticking up at one point in the flashback with Emilia when he was fighting Juice. And it's very interesting that Regulus basically died because he got put into a hole in the ground. Definitely some correlation there. Very, very sus correlation. But Pandora is a very strange character. She obviously is very strong. And the fact that she was here at all times makes you wonder, did she know? How did she know? How did she know the divine protection would disappear at this point in time? It's very sus. Now, speaking of divine protections, I guess this is a good segue to discuss that. And that is, what are divine protections? Because obviously after this episode, it's definitely implied that there is some form of will to them. There is definitely some will of at least the Sword Saint divine protection to safeguard itself and also pass down to people it wants to pass down to. And that's strange, because as we know from divine protections, when a person with a divine protection dies, typically it goes to someone else, just randomly within the world. But the fact that it gets to choose and it chooses who it wants implies that there is some form of sentience to it. The question is, what? Is it a spirit? Is divine protections actually spirits? There's a lot of things that really makes you wonder. But, the divine protection doing what it did is basically responsible for all the issues that was caused within this family, what has happened to this family, and it picking and choosing who it wants. Which, by the way, I do want to talk about a few things. I think a lot of people are going to look at this ending sequence of Reinhardt, Heinkel, and Wilhelm in a positive way, but it's not positive at all. This entire segment is a very, very negative conclusion, and I think a lot of people are going to not understand that, which I guess let's talk about it. So, Wilhelm walks off with the ashes of his wife. And Heinkel obviously is very distraught, sad, grief, abandonment, all that. And I'll talk about him literally in a moment, because there's a lot to unpackage from him as a character. But Wilhelm and Reinhardt are definitely characters that there is a lot of conflict between. Because obviously, thanks to Reinhardt getting divine protection is why Theresia lost the divine protection of the Sword Saint, and why she died in the first place. Because obviously, as soon as she lost it, Pandora intervened. And even if Wilhelm and all of them are unaware of that, the point still stands, that thanks to Reinhardt getting the divine protection, is why she died. And so there is definitely some mixed feelings and some emotion and resentment within Wilhelm, and he's been working through it for a very long time. We can tell that this man in general is very slow when it comes to emotionally expressing himself. He's someone that took literally years, decades even, basically to say I love you verbally to his wife. So I think that in general he's very slow to change, very slow to say what he wants to say, and I think because of that, this interaction between Reinhardt and Wilhelm is not left on a positive note. It is still left up in the air if they will ever really be able to make up and become actual grandfather and grandson again. But obviously, that's way off in the future. We will have to see. Which that gets to the next thing, Heinkel. Heinkel as a character is very fascinating in this episode because obviously anyone watching him and seeing how he is as a person is probably not going to like him. They're going to instantly hate him as a character. I mean, ever since his introduction in episode 1, I think that the community in general just does not like him because he's a very pathetic, cowardly character that was just given his status because of his family name, and that's about it. And it's very clear by the way he carries himself that he has a lot of guilt, a lot of resentment, a lot of envy, a lot of jealousy, abandonment issues, he has family issues, daddy issues, mommy issues, he is the whole 9-yard package, okay? And the man has a lot, but he's very human. He feels human. He feels relatable. Despite how grotesque or disgusting he is as an individual, he is someone that feels very human. At least more human than what we got from Wilhelm and Reinhardt. And I think that in general, he has a lot to work through, and he is basically the black sheep in his family. He's the outcast, and he continues to be the outcast. And I can't help but feel bad for him. As much as, like, I know he is just a literal walking filth, at least at this moment, I can't help but pity him, because obviously, if he was given enough support and love, and he was, probably, actually done right by his family, most likely he would be different right now, but obviously that's not the case. But yeah, overall, the episode is really good. I love this episode, and it makes me incredibly sad to just see the negativity around it. I mean, once again, maybe I'm just too naive, maybe I'm too positive about things, do let me know in the comments below. But yeah, rezero is good this week, at least in my opinion. Love you guys, be safe, stay healthy, Chibi out.